to another episode of the WiEA Pod. My name's Kirsty Franks. I'm a board member for Women in Estate Agency. So you'll probably know by now that every week we are bringing you inspiring guests and stories from people all over the sector, filling your Friday with as much positivity, information and takeaways as possible. None of this would be possible without our friends over at Digital Sparks who are supporting us in bringing this pod to life. If you haven't seen the work that they're doing, check out their Instagram. They're creating some amazing social content for agents across the sector. Now, on to today. So today I'm joined by another very special guest who also, as some of the previous guests, was on stage at our Women in Estate Agency conference earlier this year. This guest really tore the roof off at the conference and brought a really insightful and inspiring talk to the stage. And she talked about how to cultivate a high-performing culture. She is also probably one of the loveliest and most humble people that I've ever met, certainly within this industry. My very special guest today is Jennie Barker, Chief People Officer at Rightmove. Jennie, welcome to the pod.
Thank you very much.
So shall we start with conference?
Let's start with conference. Let's start there.
How was it for you? I kind of already know the answer to this question, in your words.
I opened with a very clear message around, I am absolutely terrified to be here, which I know is a little bit unusual for kicking things off, but I felt I'm a big believer in the power of transparency and vulnerability. Yeah. And I was like, I'm just going to be real with people about how I feel about this. So, you know, one-on-one, I will talk to anyone. I will talk all day, but put me on a stage in front of a very large auditorium of people and I'm like rabbit in headlights. But I'm also a big believer in pushing ourselves as people to keep, going into that discomfort. And I talked a bit about that on stage.
You did.
So I have to live it as well. So discomfort.
It was really authentic, Jennie, and you did. You stood on that stage and stood there and said, I am terrified of doing this. But what that meant is the audience just immediately warmed to you and you could feel kind of a sigh of, this feels like a safe space in the room.
The team made me laugh because the team who were helping me prepare at Rightmove thought that it would be a great idea to show me a picture of the auditorium to help me feel more at home in advance in the last session that we did. And they sort of put this picture up and I was like, guys, that is not helpful. I was like, that is much, much worse now. Thank you.
You'd have been better off not knowing. For
Absolutely.
sure. So I was sat next to your team at the end of your presentation, and I thought I knew everything that was going on that day. I did not know about the confetti cannons that were fired at you on that stage as soon as your presentation finished. Frightened me to death, but oh my God, it was such a good moment.
That was Colleen and I plotting, and we do love a confetti cannon. It's not the first time it's happened. So watch out.
Well, thank you for doing it, honestly. You were incredible. And
thank you.
I think you will definitely inspire other people when you talk about this was one of the most terrifying things I've ever done, but I did it and you absolutely smashed it.
Thank you. And
amazing.
I did by the end, I would say, that was nerve-wracking, but I quite enjoyed it. So it was a good thing. So I'd encourage other people who are also feeling that way. It's like, again, it's that old phrase, isn't it? Feel the fear and do it anyway.
Yeah, and the first few minutes are always the worst. And then you're like, okay, I'm actually quite enjoying myself now.
Absolutely.
Enjoying myself.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about you.
Yes.
Chief People Officer. Big title, big role, huge role. I'm just interested for you to kind of share your journey. How did you get there? How did you get into the position that you're in today?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a very short and boring version, which is...
Give me the squiggly, interesting one.
Okay, well, the short one is I fell into HR, I loved it, and I stayed forever. That's the very short version. The longer version is I studied psychology at university, didn't really know what I wanted to do with that, got some very basic careers advice, which was you can either be a clinical psychologist or you can work in HR, and being very young and naive, I was like, okay, sure, I'll pick that one. And transparently, my boyfriend at the time, now my husband, was living down in London, and I wanted to hang out with him over the summer, so I applied for a summer internship in HR, in an investment bank, and I was really lucky, and I got the job, and I came down to London, and I thought I was super fancy. I was living and working in London, and this was great. But I also found that I really loved investment banking, and I loved HR. I was sort of, hanging out on the trading floor, and it was not really fully digitised. There was lots of people shouting in phones, and I was like,
for Wall Street vibe.
I love this. This is amazing. I was like, Mum, you won't believe what I'm doing. So yeah, really, really liked it. And that then fed sort of an interest in, well, when I graduated, what am I going to do? I applied for an internship at another investment bank on their HR programme. And I joined, and I then spent 2 years sort of kicking off my career, rotating around all of the areas of HR, so I could learn a little bit about everything. Stayed at that organisation for a number of years. It was one of the big investment banks. It was a pretty intense environment, but an absolutely stellar kind of career grounding, and I grew quite quickly in that environment.
I just want to pick up on something you said there, Jennie, around making sure that you'd worked in kind of all areas and got that experience.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think we see today is the desire for people to want to fast track really quickly.
Yeah.
And it was the same for me in my career. I started off at the bottom and learned everything there was to know about marketing, so I knew that I could be credible and authentic in what I was doing. And I think we're missing that a lot today, and everyone wanting to go from that entry-level role to management so quickly.
Yeah, and the reality is that that broad grounding is what will enable you to be successful in those bigger and better roles.
Totally agree.
I do worry about sort of where it happens too quickly, as you say. Someone sort of finds themselves in that spot, and then they're just not really equipped, or they don't have the context, or just enough of the grounding in it to do a really great job of it. So I'm always, you use the term squiggly career there, and we love a squiggly career. We actually had Helen Tupper come in at Rightmove quite recently and talk to the team about squiggly careers, because that's very much where it's at now in terms of careers. It's not really this job to this job to this job to this job. It's collecting experiences, because things are moving so quickly, jobs are changing so quickly.
Embracing that.
Yeah. I always just encourage people, get as much breadth of experience as you can, try new things, delve into something that you're not really sure if you want to do, but you want to test it out, because you'll probably learn something really important from it.
So sorry, I interrupted you.
So spent time in that investment bank. I stayed in banking essentially, doing a variety of different roles for the first 17 years of my career. And I touched upon probably all areas of HR during that time. And I lived in the US for a while, so I got sort of that cultural experience as well, which was fantastic. And then I decided it was probably time for a move from an industry perspective, because I'd been sort of fairly steadily in one industry. So I moved into the data space, and in the data space I was business partnering what was essentially a little software function within a big global organisation. And so then I kind of really learned about tech, and I thought it was super cool. I'd spent a long time in kind of these very corporate environments, and then I was in this space where, everything was a bit more nimble, it was faster, it was, it was a bit cooler. It was exciting, and I really enjoyed it. And so the latter part of my career, as I've sort of now moved into the roles where you are still doing a little bit of everything, because you're, heading up the function, I've focused in on the tech space, and I'm really, really enjoying that.
Yeah, amazing. And how long have you been with Rightmove?
Oh, it's about 16 months now, so I keep saying long enough that I'm supposed to know what I'm doing, not actually long enough to really know all of the ins and outs.
But an amazing journey though, amazing.
Yeah.
So one of the big topics I wanted to talk to you about today, and you've been kind enough to tell me that it's all right for me to talk to you about this today, is actually to kind of lift the bonnet a little bit in terms of not just your career path, but you as a person and your journey. And actually we were talking just before the pod today around, we're both Yorkshire girls.
We are indeed.
Both from Wakefield, who knew? You're not there anymore, I'm still there. But actually, obviously the Women in Estate Agency Group, we're all about how we can support, empower, champion women. And I know that this is something that's very, very close to your heart, and we'll come on to talk about that a lot more. But one of the things that you said it was okay for me to talk to you about today was the challenges you faced of becoming a mum and balancing that with a kind of high-profile, successful career. So you've got 3 children, and you were already on that career trajectory when you had your 3 children. And I know that you've talked to me about how kind of coming back to work and coming back into a leadership position after that was a challenging time for you to figure out who you were and what that meant for you. So
Yeah.
I'd love you to share that story with us.
Absolutely, yeah, happy to. So at the time we knew we wanted to start a family was just after we'd come back from the States. So I'd just completed an expat assignment that was very much kind of focused on growing my career and kind of taking me to the next level. You know, as you say, I'd sort of built up to a certain level of seniority by that point, but you know, this was the journey that we decided to go on. I struggled initially to get pregnant, and that was quite hard, as it is for anyone who's going through that. But was lucky eventually, fell pregnant, and in about week 5 or 6 started to feel really unwell, which initially was like, okay, this is what morning sickness is, but progressed to the point where I was like, I'm not sure this is what morning sickness is, and I was diagnosed with hyperemesis, so I was quite sick for most of the pregnancy.
As women, some of the things that we go through, we think, oh, well, this is how I'm supposed to be feeling.
Exactly.
Let's just power on.
Exactly. Then you're like, maybe you don't need to question
right.
this. This doesn't feel right.
So you were diagnosed early.
That meant that I was signed off from work quite quickly when I fell pregnant. So I sort of missed a chunk of work in my pregnancy, and then got my gorgeous baby girl, Ava, and stayed off with her for 12 months. Before going out, I mean, I think I've probably indicated, I was very career focused. I've always been quite driven, very ambitious. I've always been sort of, you know, driven to think about what's next and how can I grow and how can I develop and how can I progress and all of that sort of stuff. And I came back. I initially said, funnily enough, to work that I thought I'd be back quite quickly. I was sort of like, I think I'll be back. You know, you don't need to worry. I'll be back quite quickly. And then when I was off, I was like,
that whole kidding ourselves before we have the baby moment. Yeah. I'm gonna have this baby.
Absolutely.
3 weeks, I'll be back. Don't you worry about me.
But I took a full 12 months and really loved that time with her. And then I was quite excited about going back to work. I was, you know, ready to talk about something other than, you know, what'd been eaten that day and stuff like that.
A hot coffee.
Yeah, exactly. But it just wasn't easy. It wasn't easy at all. And I was working for a boss at the time who, on paper, this should have been really good. She was a mum. She had a couple of kids. And I thought that it would just be like going back to what I was doing before. But it's really not. It's really not the same. Because I think, obviously, you've changed as a person. Work's changed by the time you get back. Everything's kind of different. And so you're off from the get-go. And my manager at the time, on the face of it, she was supportive. She said a lot of the right things. You know, I got lovely gifts, and she said, you know, this is going to be great. We're going to work through this together. But the reality, sort of underneath, I think, was that she expected me to also be the same as I was before I went out, and it was a little bit like, I would liken it to sort of a parent withholding their love. That's how it felt with her.
Did you go back full time?
I went back 4 days.
Okay.
That was the agreement that we came to, and I was really happy with that balance.
And in terms of how you felt different, I mean, obviously it's like starting a new job again, isn't it? You kind of got to learn the ropes again, figure out what the hell's going on and what's been happening in the last 12 months. But how emotionally did you feel going back to work?
Really emotionally, yeah. You know, there's obviously the stuff that everyone goes through. I'm not with my baby anymore, and is my baby okay? And
guilt.
I mean, gosh, the guilt about leaving, the guilt when you're actually kind of getting to the flow at work, and then you think, oh, I haven't thought about them for a couple of hours. That's awful. That must make me a terrible mum. But I think the hardest thing I went through emotionally was, because I had been so driven, I had really made my career a huge part of my identity. And I went back wanting to kind of, you know, be the same as I was and, you know, go back fully into things. But over here, there was also this other thing that I wanted to be awesome at. So I was like, I want to be awesome at work, but I also want to be an awesome mum. And both of those things require too much of my time to give as much to either of them as I want to. And a totally different skill set. Exactly, totally different skill set.
There's no amount of power dressing that is going to make this situation over here, this child happy.
No, that's right. But for me, it was a real identity crisis. And I don't say that lightly. I really kind of went through it at that time because I was really questioning who am I? Like, what am I doing in the world? Not just in my job and as a mum, but what do I want? Like, what's important to me?
And how disappointing was it for you? You talked about, you went back to a boss who was a mum. That should have been a really easy transition, right? But you almost got this kind of passive relationship, and you felt almost out of the club when you went back. Did you address it?
Not directly. I didn't feel confident enough to directly. So I probably suffered in silence for too long dealing with it myself. And obviously I felt massively disappointed, but I also didn't know any different. I didn't know whether that was the way that everything was going to be. And I went down a path for a while around, can I even be in the corporate world anymore? I bought a business, and I decided to try that for a while. Tried to build up a franchise business and thought I just need to do something completely different because I don't think I can be in the corporate world. That's not a fit for people like me anymore.
And it makes sense as you're in this kind of tailspin of who am I, what do I want to do, and trying to kind of find a new normal for yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
So talk about how, you went on to have 2 further children.
I did. So I think 2 things shifted. I did shift into a different role within the same company, but a different role, and that took me out of the scope of that manager and meant that I was working with someone who was really supportive, genuinely, ironically, who wasn't a parent. But the feeling was just then totally different, and I felt trusted and supported. So that shifted. But actually, I think most of the work just came from myself and working through for myself. What is it that matters to me? What is it that I want in life? And then, when I decided I did want to be in that corporate world and I did want to kind of continue and grow in my career, it was about figuring out how to then feel confident again. And I think that came from really recognizing that the value I added needed to be something different now. So the value I added, I couldn't be the person who was working, really crazy long hours. I couldn't be the person who was volunteering for every additional opportunity because it would give me, greater exposure or a new set of skills. I had to pull back on those sorts of things because I didn't have the time to do it.
Responsibilities,
But I started to grow more confidence in the value I add being the judgments that I can make based on the experiences that I've got. And then I started to look for what are the new things that I can do that actually I couldn't do? Like I think I said it on stage at the conference, I can multitask like a badass. I am really good at that.
And I think motherhood also brings a totally new perspective. So you probably bring more empathy to a role. You bring more understanding. You bring a broader perspective. Whereas I think I can only talk from a personal point of view. I was probably much more tunnel visioned and a bit more vicious before I had a child.
Yeah, that absolutely resonates. So, I think it definitely has made me a better leader. But you sort of talked in the beginning about the advice to people. I mean, that would be a big part of it for me, is really kind of doing the internal work to kind of think about what you want, and then really getting clear on what are the skills that I've got, what's the value I add, and bolster yourself with people who tell you those things and reinforce the fact that you've got, a huge amount to add. So work on yourself, but I'd also say really pay attention to the environment that you're in, because, trying to change an environment is exhausting. And there may be some environments where it's just not going to be the right place for you, and you need to be in a place where you feel trusted and supported. So.
And I think, it can be a very lonely place as a new mum. You're exhausted, coming back to work, trying to now wear these 2 different hats. Your mind can be playing games with you a lot. We know that's really a really challenging time. So you start to kind of go into yourself a little bit and feel like, oh my God, this is just me feeling like this, and it can be really lonely. And I think you've got to talk.
Absolutely.
You've got to talk. You've got to open up. You've got to know that you're not on your own. And I mean, from a HR perspective, a people perspective, any good organisation that you're working for should surely have an open door policy where you can say, come and have this conversation with us, or have this conversation with your line manager.
Absolutely. People have got to be able to talk about this stuff. I mean, it's, it sits parallel to the whole mental health conversation. The more we don't talk about these things, the more difficult it becomes, because everyone believes that they're the only person who's dealing with it, and they need to keep quiet, and they shouldn't seek help, they shouldn't draw attention to themselves, and the situation just worsens. Pretty much every woman I've spoken to who's come back from having a child has dealt with this to some degree. And not just the women, the men too. It's a different set of circumstances, and it's different set of challenges in a lot of cases. But it's difficult. Your life changes massively when you go through that, and you can't be the same person that you were before. So you've got to figure out, what are the new ways of working, and how are we going to do this? And
be kind to yourself, because that's okay.
Yeah.
Nobody's expecting you to just step back into the shoes that you were in before.
Exactly.
And I think as women, we're so bloody hard on ourselves, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think, there's a big thing around kind of accepting that I'm doing my best here.
Yeah.
So we talked at the conference again around the gender jaws,
Yes.
So this is around within the estate agency sector. In terms of entry-level roles, it's around 75% women.
Yep.
But then when you get up to board-level positions, it's 63% male.
Yep.
So that's a huge swing. And a big part of why we, as women in estate agency, are still banging the drum and still feel we have so much more to do. But I'm interested in your view on, firstly, why do you think such a big swing? And secondly, what can we start to do about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't have the answer, but it's. I think it's a complex set of circumstances that mean that it is the way that it is. But I think a big part of it for me is history. The past informs the future, sadly, and because things have been that way, they continue to be that way, which is frustrating as hell, isn't it?
We don't accept that in anything else, do we?
No, exactly. But you look at those studies, and I've seen multiple ones where people ask kids to draw a picture of, a pilot, a doctor, all of those sorts of things, and they inevitably draw a man. And I think that plays out to some degree across all industries and types of roles. There is an expectation. So there is an expectation of what do we think of when we think of a senior person in business. And it's based on what we've seen historically. And that's the sort of the pattern that we make in our brain.
Ask them to draw a CEO.
Right,
what
exactly.
Are they gonna draw?
And it's really hard. So I think that the answer to that part of it is we've got to role model. We've got to role model our asses off. We've got to make sure that people see a different variety of, what someone in X position looks like. Because that tells that person, okay, well, that's okay. That person looks like me. I think I can go do that. So I genuinely think it probably starts from a really young age, this sort of conditioning. And then it just becomes self-fulfilling prophecy to some extent.
Absolutely, and I think we have different responsibilities at different touch points. We have responsibilities as mothers. I'm raising a boy. Do I feel guilty that I'm, having to work long hours and travelling a lot? Yeah, sure. But I'm also showing him what a strong woman has to, looks like, I hope.
Absolutely.
Sounds, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I'm showing him that if you want nice things in life, if you want to be successful, if you want to achieve things, then you go out and graft for it.
Absolutely.
And that doesn't just need to be a male role, I'm wanting to teach him that. But I think we have responsibilities as line managers within the businesses that we work in to champion women and to really push them forward. We have responsibilities when we've got people coming back to work after maternity leave or after illness or after whatever that might be, and really sitting down to understand, okay, what's your superpower now? How do we harness that to give you this next stage in your career journey?
And particularly at that point of returning after having kids, sort of back to what we were talking about before, because I think that's also a huge reason that we see this drop
I do
off,
as well.
because women just disproportionately do have the caring responsibility in a family, and it begins from the outset, because the woman takes a long maternity leave, and then that can lead to the way that family dynamic is set up is that the woman is the primary caregiver, and so when it comes to career stuff, they're more likely to request a flexible work arrangement, which, as we know, sadly,
doesn't always get approved.
Absolutely, it doesn't always get approved, and if it does get approved, then often that can be limiting in terms of, there's lots of studies that show that you're less likely to be promoted when you're on a flexible work arrangement. So, there's all of that stuff that we've got to think through as well. And I think some of the answer there is we've got to make sure that men are involved from the beginning. Totally. And again, so many studies that show that they want to be. A man is twice as likely to have a flexible work arrangement turned down than a woman, because of that sort of, I think the background thing is can't your wife do that, type vibe. There are so many men who want to play a bigger role, but they can't do it because the world isn't set up to support that either. So I really feel like that's a lever that we need to push too.
Yeah, and within WiEA, we're all about how together we can make a difference. And I hope there's a load of men listening to this conversation as well, so they can hear from our perspective how that feels, the struggles, what it's like coming back, what a scary place it is coming back into work, and the kind of support that we need. But actually, if we've got somebody that gets that, that understands it, and gives not only a safe space, but a lift up in terms of this woman is going to be incredible if I really support her going forward, then that's where change happens, and that's how we can make a difference.
Absolutely.
So you, I know, do a lot around mentoring as well, which I'm huge advocate of. Talk to me a little bit more about it.
Sure. It's something that I feel really strongly about doing, particularly because of what I outlined, like how hard I found it to return to work after having children. So, I sort of I feel a sense of responsibility to kind of help other people not have as hard a time as I had. So, I've done various different forms of mentoring over the years. I've got mentors within Rightmove now, mentees within Rightmove now. I've got mentees from organisations that I previously have worked at who I've stayed in touch with. But I also work with a fantastic organisation called Leaders Plus, and they're a social enterprise that focus on supporting returning parents after a period of absence at work and helping them to feel and to actively make it happen in terms of their careers and feel like they can come back and have that impact. So they're an awesome organisation. So they
could any of the mums in our group reach out to them? And
they would love that. I mean, they run multiple sort of cohorts through the year, different groupings of people, but they essentially take people, put them through kind of a really fantastic programme that really helps them kind of think through all those things I talked about. Who am I? What do I want to be? What matters to me? How can I go about taking things forward? And then they pair them with senior mentors within businesses who've been through that experience and can really kind of help them through. And so you work in a cycle and you're kind of partnered up with someone for 6 months, and I love it. And the mentees are always so grateful, and they're like, I really appreciate you taking the time. And I'm like, dude, I'm doing this for me. Like, I really enjoy this. I enjoy getting to know people from different industries because I'm often paired up with someone who's in a completely different space than I'm in, and you learn about those challenges. And it feels good, transparently, to help someone through that and to see them find that confidence again. That feels awesome.
Amazing. And like you say, yes, you're giving back, yes, you're supporting, but actually you're getting an awful lot out of this as well. Well, we'll make sure that we put all the details, the contact details and the links for the pod when we go live. Fantastic. So everybody can have access to that. So that's really great. I could talk to you all day, Jennie, and time is running away with us, but there's a couple of other bits that I just want to touch on. So obviously Rightmove are our key partner at Women in a State Agency, and the alignment feels so incredible in terms of what we are as two organisations trying to achieve. Talk to me about your views on the partnership and Women in a State Agency, I guess.
Yeah, well, I'm a huge fan of the partnership. I mean, it aligns completely with what we care about as a business and what we care about from a cultural perspective within our own organisation. You know, and I have to just be honest, it's just a fantastic organisation to partner with. The energy and the commitment of everyone involved is absolutely phenomenal. So we love being involved with it. You know, the conference, for anyone who's listening who didn't come, who hasn't been, and there'll be an opportunity to come again. Yeah. It's honestly, and I don't say this, you know, lightly, one of the best conferences I've ever been to.
Oh, thank you.
And I cried and I laughed and I danced. None of which I was expecting from a day-long conference. But it was so fantastic.
It's a really special day, and well, you know, we bang on about it all the time, obviously. But yeah, your support means the world to us, and I think it's been really lovely today just to kind of get to know you a little bit more. And I think sometimes we see people in these senior roles with these big titles that are successful businesswomen and think, oh my God, they've had no hardship. They've got all of their you-know-what together. They're absolutely bossing this. But actually, everyone, the majority of people that you speak to, if you peel back some of the layers of the onion, there's stories under there of it wasn't that easy. And there have been hurdles, and I've had to do work. And I think, you know, it's really refreshing of you to be so kind of open and honest about that, and I'm really grateful for you doing that today, Jennie.
You're very welcome. I've really enjoyed it.
Oh, well, I have to ask you one last question
before
we head off. So we ask all of our guests on the pod, who would you like to be sat here on this chair coming and sharing their story with us?
Well, I'm going to make one nomination from Rightmove, but I'm not sure she's going to be hugely delighted with me. But Lydia Yao, our Chief Strategy Officer,
okay.
I think she would be a fantastic person to chat to. But in general, I'm just really excited to hear from loads more people across the industry. Again, it's all learning and different perspectives. So it's going to be great to tune in.
Yeah, lots more coming up. Well, thank you so much, Jennie. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.